Alrighty, hello, how are we everyone? Has been such an interesting one to unpack, this chapter. It feels like it's going into so many different ways. So essentially this chapter is all about building our artist self, and I've broken it into two different ways, right? Which is our artist identity and technicalities. And I believe that building your artist self is something that you kind of do constantly throughout your artist journey, because obviously it can feel like there's a lot of areas that you're trying to touch on and maintain in that sense and master. Okay, my priority right now is being able to find intrinsic motivation, solutions for discomfort, and building a system to maintain building my artist self. So that's what this video is going to be about. When it comes to finding intrinsic motivation and procrastination, essentially the psychology behind procrastination, which I think at the end of anything that you're trying to do, the issue is procrastination. So our brain is wired to avoid discomfort, and that essentially creates cycles of avoidance, which is relying on deadlines than intrinsic motivation. So that's why I think it's important to think about, okay, well, what is it that motivates me? I think there's two different types of motivation: ego motivation and then intrinsic motivation. So I think that it's important to understand both. And so I think when it comes to my intrinsic motivations, we had touched on self-actualization, self-resonance, and accessibility to self-impact. Being able to create something that is in me and then actualizing it. When I mean actualizing, I don't necessarily mean by making it a product, but I think actualizing for me is more about creating it into existence, okay? And then I think it's resonance, this self-resonance with myself. But I think that in saying that, I think that I like my work to have a sense of impact. First, self-impact, but more in the sense of like the accessibility of it to create potential impact would probably be my third. Whilst I feel like my ego motivation would honestly be, it would just be to be understood, honestly. With that being said, I think when it comes to our intrinsic motivation and our ego's motivation, I think both are valid to have. And I think that both are important to fulfill. I think that obviously the priority of them, as well as I guess how we go about getting it, is probably more important. I think the difference between intrinsic motivation and ego motivation is more to do with how we get it. So I feel like intrinsic motivation is something that is an internal process, whilst our ego motivation is more something that we can receive. Now that we understand what our motivations are, we have to think about, because they're also obviously the things that we procrastinate on. So why do we procrastinate on these areas of motivation? And so I realized that a lot of it for me has very much to do with technicalities, which is learning the software, delivery, and performance and embodiment. And I say performance and embodiment because I think that it's a very specific area in the artist identity, which also kind of intersect with the technicalities of things. So I think that like we are to break first the two down of like artist identity and technicalities. I think artist identity is all about like, your self-concept, your purpose, your intention, I guess like what you're representing, and essentially I guess what your brand is as an artist. So that can also be what you are as a product, as I dare say, and as an essence. So when I'm talking about performance and embodiment, I'm talking about more the essence of it. I guess you could say the theatricity of Naisa in that sense. And that's what I meant by like it is kind of in that grey circle of technicality and artist identity. And then technicality is kind of everything to do with your output. Yeah, I think essentially technicalities is all about the medium that you're in. I think that when it comes to these three components, it's now understanding, okay, cool, they're the areas. And then it's about the solutions of discomfort. So I think for me specifically, and obviously this would be a different process for everyone, but I think when it comes to the solutions of discomfort, I would first think about, okay, what is it that creates discomfort in these particular areas? I did mention that we're going to talk about perfectionism, so we're going to talk about it. I think that because because my intrinsic motivations is very much around, you know, this kind of self-resonance and self-fulfillment in what I am envisioning, I think that's where the perfectionism can come in for me. I think it's more about, you know, how am I able to get what I want, what I see, for it to be actualized. That comes back down to what I am being perfectionistic about. I think it's really about both the visual and auditory quality. I think I'm very particular with it. I think that when it comes to my standard, things that I consume, as well as things that I resonate with, things that I'm inspired by, things that I create, there is very much a personal standard that I have when it comes to the visual and auditory quality of it, as well as, like, you know, I guess you could say the spiritual essence of it, or the energy of it as well, which can obviously feel a little bit overwhelming because, I mean, that's practically everything. I don't really know what else you can, like, put in that. Okay, so now that I kind of understand where my perfectionism is within the area, which is technicalities, yeah, I think things sounding good and things feeling good is kind of more my priority right now. And so then that obviously is my areas of discomfort. I'm going to see if I can now apply the structure that I had organized into what we're doing now. So essentially, I had mentioned that there's this thing called fast thinking and slow thinking. And so fast thinking is essentially instincts and creative intuition. And so that's where we essentially operate without conscious control and draws on experience, pattern recognition, and emotional cues. Essentially, fast thinking is just like what comes instinctively to us, where we're not necessarily thinking too hard about it. I don't want to say flow state because I think both of them are flow state. And then slow thinking is essentially where you're kind of reflecting, revising, and critically thinking, right? It comes to the whole technical aspect of things, let's just say software, learning software. I think that the most fast thinking area is, for me, just for an example of how we can apply this, or how I'm going to apply this to all of them, really being able to already envision most of the time what it is that I'm already wanting. Going through all the different sounds that you can put into it, or into your song, for example, I think comes very intuitively to me. Whilst I feel like the slow thinking of, like, understanding, I guess, like, all the different steps and stages, and I guess the speed of more so knowing exactly what plugins, for example, you need to create that certain sound or effect. All right, so to kind of focus on my areas of discomfort, I'm now going to apply it into the 4 stages of creativity. The 4 stages is preparation, incubation, illumination, and verification. Essentially, preparation to me is kind of the same as inspiration. So with your discomfort, right? Essentially, you can come up with the intention that you want to, I guess, resolve from your discomfort. And then it's about exploring and researching and identifying challenges within that. If I want to work on software, then I would start doing demos, okay? And then we have incubation, all about taking a conscious break from problem solving and strategizing and making sure you're marinating on it. That would kind of be me, where I'm able to just, like, think about, you know, the kind of demos that I want to do, how I would kind of construct it, the kind of sounds that I'm liking right now to put into my demos. The 3rd step is illumination. So illumination is all about where you're essentially combining your ideas with your flow state. And I think that's, like, something that more naturally happens, where that's when it starts to click and you're like, oh my God, I know that my next 30-second demo is going to be this type of genre or this type of beat. And that's where you're starting to get direction and clarity, as well as realizations in regards to the process that you've been creating so far. And then after that is verification, all about ideas testing, refinement, drafting, editing, rehearsing. Feedback is essential, and reflection. for example, would be where I would just start practicing doing a 30-second demo, maybe one every day. I think drafting is one of my favorite words when it comes to understanding the process. Drafting is such a nice word where it's like you're kind of preparing it for it to be a potential outcome, but it's also kind of relieves the pressure from it. And I think that that is probably the most effective way to really start actualizing things without the pressure of perfectionism. I'll also note that preparation is considered to be a slow thinking process. Incubation is considered to be a fast thinking process. Same with illumination. And then verification is also considered to be a slow thinking process. That's practically the process that I have figured so far. I'm just trying to think of like, what's a way that you can kind of become at peace with perfectionism, because I feel like perfectionism's something that's always going to be there, and it's always going to be the thing that is challenging your motivation. And I think perfectionism in many ways can lead to self-mastery. It's really about being able to befriend perfectionism. I do think that perfectionism is an illusion in the sense of what we perceive and what we believe feels perfect. Perfectionism is more a state of how we want to feel than how things actually are. The way that we want things to feel is what will conquer perfectionism, or which kind of overrides perfectionism. As corny as it is, I think that it is kind of trying to not put perfectionism as this end result or as something that is like separate from you. If there are moments where, you know, our perfectionism is really challenging our motivation, I think it's really just about reminding and embracing perfectionism of you just being. Other than that, that's everything. I hope you have a lovely night, and I'll see you soon.